The topic of this panel discussion is quite challenging. It's about profitable and long-term investments in this field. And I think it's amazing. To me, having worked a lot of years with IoT and M2M, the only parallel I have figured out is really when the internet came to us, 50 years ago or 20 years ago. And I think I always say that the only difference between when internet came last time and now is that, ignorance is not an excuse. You have to start to look into it, whatever you do. The connected future will hit everyone on the planet, every single individual, every single company, every single government, every single organization. So we just have to start to look into that. So whatever you do in your daily business or daily work, get going. Try things, stop talking, do things, try things, talk to people, get around, go to events like this. I think that's my best advice. So answering or discussing the question about profitable long-term investment raises two questions to me. First of all, for whom? Are we talking about investors or governments or enterprises? I think that's three kind of dimensions of the questions that we have to address. And secondly, like when we approached the internet, we all know what happened. It changed more or less everything. And there are a lot of winners and a lot of good investments that paid off well, and even more investments that didn't pay off at all. So this is kind of a $50 billion question that we're going to discuss today. Very difficult. So I think we get going right away. So the first, I need my glasses now, I'm sorry about that. Age, pace. So when we talk about IoT, I always think about, hold a second. Yeah, I always say that there's three deliverables that we really can get out of this technology. It's sustainability, security, and efficiency. Those are always the three values that we can create using these kind of solutions. And I also use that to explain why this is so important, because all of the three is on top of everybody's agenda. Nations, people, and specifically companies. So in order to start this discussion, I would like to ask you, Jeremy, who have this control of the whole industry, what do you think about those deliverables from IoT? Efficiency, security, and sustainability. Is that a good summary?
It's not a bad summary. It will do us very well to get us going. Efficiency, I mean, I would probably substitute the word scalability there. My personal expectation is that the Internet of Things is taking us. There are so many definitions of M2M and IoT and what the two mean and where they meet. I think one thing that we can all agree on, though, is that the Internet of Things takes it to a new level. And there is a greater scale, therefore, in terms of consumer applications as well as enterprise applications, for which M2M has probably been best known. So in terms of efficiency, if it doesn't meet the usability task of being a technology that takes new services, new efficiencies, new possibilities to a wider audience, then it's failed. Then it really has served no purpose. But seeing as that's what we're starting to encounter, I think it works. In terms of security, this is an issue that we've been covering an awful lot in M2M now and in our sister magazine, Vanilla Plus. It's been thought for far too long that it was something that needed to be tackled later on, because in many cases in M2M initially, these were private networks. They were not internet connected. There was no risk of breaches in security. But with the growth of applications now internet-enabled, clearly we're talking about a whole new series of risks. Risks for the corporate provider of services, risks for the consumer end user, and at that point, you have to start again in your assessment of security. It can no longer be some kind of bolt-on solution. You can't go to the market and turn to a security provider and say, I have a solution, it's been running for 5 years, I now need you to make it secure. You can't work like that. It has to be engineered in from the get-go, from the very moment of inception. And if security doesn't become one of the key planks of the architecture of a service, then somebody is riding for a very serious fall. So those are my thoughts on two of those aspects. I don't want to hold the floor.
Sikora, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said. Maybe a few additional aspects with regard first to efficiency. Even if I'm coming from the academic side, I mean, why do people use new technology? Either because they can reduce cost, or they can add value, increase the efficiency of your crop plantation, or having more information at the fingertips. And I think this is one of the crucial points, either reducing cost, because you can share information, you can share sensors and exchange the information, or because you can add value. Sustainability, one point that you did not elaborate on, I think is very important. I mean, seeing the title of our discussion now, if we are talking about long-term investments, this is very crucial. Many of the projects that we are doing are in the field of industrial automation or in smart metering, and their investment cycles are 2 or 3 decades. So that means you now, in 2015, have to decide or make a technology decision which holds through to the year 2040. Whatever there comes in new silicon devices, in new security attacks, and so on. And I think this is a very tough decision which we need to take for today.
Yeah. Mr. Machnig, I was just saying that. I simplified IoT and said that we actually, I think there are 3 deliverables: security, sustainability, and efficiency. And I asked the panelists to comment if they agreed on that in general.
Yeah, I would agree. These are 3 main elements. But to my mind, when we are talking about this, we have to talk about one very important question. What is the political framework? Mm-hmm. Give me one idea. If we want to develop a European market, it's no longer possible to have, let's say, 28 different data security laws. If we want to have, let's say, special services, we should have a common understanding what are special services and what means net neutrality. So what I'm trying to say is, if you want to develop the business and want to be a real player in the game, we have to find European rules for this. And to be very honest, because I'm the negotiator in the Telecommunication Council, this is hard work. Because there are a lot of national interests. Everyone is saying we have very special situation in our country on data security whatsoever. So, and we have to understand that this is very important to have this, let's say, political framework on a European level, so that you are going to have, let's say, investment security, because as you said, there are investment cycles that go 20, 30 or 40 years, and if you don't know, maybe the German law is going to change by European law, or that you have to make an investment that is that's only for, let's say, that's only for Germany, but you can't roll it out, let's say, in the European market. This is a huge problem, and so we have to work on this. Otherwise, this is not possible. The second thing is we have to make clear what is the real outcome for customers. I just was outside and having a talk with a company on the question Internet of Things, and they showed me what kind of data you can get, let's say, from your car. And I asked him, do you really think the customer wants this? The second question for me, and that's a very important question, there are huge technology opportunities and possibility, but we don't know yet if the customer really wants it. Because I don't want that my car knows at every time how many people I'm traveling with. It doesn't have to know this. You can, the technology option is there. So what I'm trying to say, there are two elements. We need a legal framework, European-wide. Second, we have to understand better what does the customer really wants, because that's not clear yet. And third, there are a lot of security questions. As I said in my speech, if we want to have a rollout, especially in small and medium-sized companies, and I talk a lot with them, there are two questions. How to make the digitalization in my company? What are the steps to go there? Because you can't say this, now I'm digitalized. Well, that's a process. And the second thing is, how can we build up data security and data protection? Because I don't want to lose my USP. I don't want to lose my competitive. So, and that is, that might happen if I lose my data. So that are three elements for the question of markets, for profitability and long-term investment. These are, to my mind, three major elements.
Very good. I'm working, as I told you, with entrepreneurs a lot, and primarily in Sweden, but also elsewhere. And your first point, Mr. Magnus, was very good, because the problem is that they have to approach country by country in Europe, which is by far too complicated for a small company. So I really welcome all those initiatives to make this kind of more, at least European. And the issue is that those companies are competing with, for instance, United States companies or Chinese companies who have huge markets already to address. So I think it's very essential. It's a very good
just one sentence of this. When we go to China, and China is very much interested in working together with Germany on Industry 4.0, and they say always one sentence: you have the technology, we have the market. So they say, if you want to cooperate with us, you have to give us the technology so that you can build up the markets. That is not a deal we can go, but this shows what might happen in the future. So we have to develop a common market, 500 million. That is compared to China, just half the size. But that's absolutely needed, and we have to speed up. If we do the political process we normally do, we can't go with the pace or the speed of digitalization. So we have to find decision-making processes, law-making processes that are much more faster than today. And we have to understand, when we make legislation today, our thinking is coming from the mechanical world. It's not the thinking of the digital world. So we have to learn. We have to learn, and we have always to balance different interests, because we have to build up acceptance. Otherwise, people, public, companies are not going with us.
Perfect. So now we have identified one good long-term investment, profitable, which is for the government to help in Europe to help provide this.
I mean, security was touched on earlier, but there's a feeling sometimes that security has to be maximum at all times. It doesn't. What we need is appropriate level security. For example, if you are engaging with an IoT service and you're looking to buy a bottle of Coke or water from a vending machine, you don't need the same level of security as you do if you're engaging with IoT and it's providing you with a monitoring for your cardiac condition. If you have a diabetic condition, your requirements are utterly different. So it's appropriate level security, and I think we sometimes lose sight of this. We get terribly excited about the need to have maximum security at all times. That can slow things down.
Very good comment.
Yeah. Let me also make, please, two additional comments with regard to security. I completely agree with you with regard to the danger of privacy data loss for companies. That's critical. But security has an additional issue for being a precondition for safety, for safe operation. And the more critical, safety critical and life critical M2M applications we have, the more critical also the security issue becomes. Just take the car example. If you can break into a car via the Bluetooth interface and the multimedia system and can remote control the car, that's a problem. And this will certainly hinder the safe operation of the car. Same holds true for medical applications and so on. Second point, with regard to what you have been saying, having different levels of security, I completely agree with this. And what we increasingly see, I think, is really a differentiation of the different security levels we need. There are various reference models for the field of home automation. Currently, there's a reference model being described by VDKE on the national level. There's a working group 716 which describes this model, and we define their different security levels, but with one distinction and one important issue, to have secure interfaces between those levels. Because if you don't have security at maximum at all devices, but you can move data from one device to the next one, then you have a beautiful backdoor, which is also the example with the Bluetooth into the car. So having these different levels also makes or puts the requirement to have safe and secure interfaces between those levels. Without this, it won't work.
May I, sorry, please
go
ahead. May I introduce another component of IoT then? Infrastructure. In order to make all those applications work properly, nicely, securely, and so forth, we need a lot of infrastructure of all kinds of sorts. What part does the government play in that, and what part of that should be provided by enterprise? Is that a good bet for an enterprise, for instance? Or how should we go around making sure that we get to the infrastructure we need, let's say across Europe, to deliver and run our services? Any views on that?
Well, I hesitate to say this with an esteemed State Secretary on the panel, but I don't believe that the primary role here is for the government. I think these are slightly, I'm maybe old-fashioned in this, but I'm a believer in market forces. Because if there is a demand for a service and there are several different forms of connection, the one that provides the best service most efficiently, most affordably, and most quickly is going to be the one that wins out, no matter which one a government or a supranational organization tells us.
Yeah, you are right in principle, but not practically. I'll give you one simple example. We have to have a certain infrastructure standard all over Germany. And we don't only have, let's say, urbanized areas, we have also rural areas. And to be very honest, in certain rural areas, there is no business model for certain infrastructure, for certain broadband infrastructure. But often we have there very, very good small and medium-sized companies. And if they don't have any access to internet and all these questions, they are out of the market. So what we need is, I totally agree with you, we need, let's say, business models that are work, but in some areas, we also have, let's say, public investment. And that's what we do. Or we need intelligent regulation. Give you one idea. When we have die Versteigerung, what means Versteigerung? Please help me. The frequencies, we have this frequent fare. And what we do, those who are going for this, they have to take the following, they have to do the following. They have to do a certain investment in certain rural areas. That is a kind of regulation that's needed, because otherwise you get a split country. Those who have broadband internet access and others don't. The second is, and I'm very sure about this, we had a lot of regulation in the telecommunications sector. Sometimes, and it's very complicated, it's one of my daily business to look for this. And sometimes this kind of regulation is not helpful for investment. So we have to look, how can we build up a certain form of regulation where we support investment, because we have certain regulations that don't support investments. That's the second part. But I would like, can I raise one question, because I'm very interested in this. A couple of weeks ago, I had a very interesting conversation with a couple of telecommunication experts and internet experts. And they said, and we were talking about the question of European sovereignty on the technology side for internet, for digitalization. Because if you look, what is the real case? We are dependent in Europe on countries like, or companies coming from Korea, Taiwan, Japan, US. And the question is, do we need certain technical or industrial devices that are produced in Europe that are essential? And the answer from this guy was the following. The truth is, we don't have these technologies. We have to import them. But it's even worse. Some of those things we are going to import that are very important for our infrastructure for the internet, we don't understand. If we don't understand them, also question of security, we can't understand them. And my question is to you as experts, is that true? Do you have the same view on this? Because if this would be true, we should and must have huge investments in qualifications, in building up our, let's say, own industrial base for this digitalization process, for key elements and key devices. So my question is that true? Are we in a situation in Europe that we don't even understand the certain technology devices that we are dependent on to make the internet world work? So if that is true, this would have huge consequences. So I would like to have your point of view, because that's a very important question.
Yes, I would agree in this. We have mostly.
Okay, mostly, okay.
I mean, for the last maybe 1 or 2 decades, Europe, Germany and Europe have lost significant industry share in semiconductor industry, which are obviously the building blocks for all digitalization, and also in telecommunication. I mean, if we look at the big telecom manufacturers, well, the Europeans are not the upcoming ones. And those are the 2 major elements that we have to import then. I mean, I have been working in semiconductor industry before joining in university. However, also in semiconductor industry, you never have national industry. This is a global market with device manufacturers from all over the world, with back-end in Southeast Asia. So this is really global, and it cannot be looked at on a national level. I think this is difficult. However, yes, I see this danger that we are very much dependent from others. The other side of the medal is, if we are talking about teamwork, about not doing everything anew, we have heard this already during the morning. Yeah? It's not just take building blocks. This is a normal consequence, that you just take a building block and you don't know what's inside. However, especially with regard to security, I think this is a major issue, yes.
Would you agree?
Yes and no. I agree in the loss of skills. There has been a deterioration in the skill sets throughout parts of Europe, throughout most of Europe. And there is a challenge for us all within Europe to try and ensure that that is stopped and turned around. But I think the point that you make, Professor Sikora, about the internationalism, the globalization of the providers and of the ecosystems the providers work within also plays to the point that you made earlier, State Secretary, about it, where you have the demand and 400 million, 500 million consumers is a heck of a demand. You do have considerable authority to be able to instigate the market changes that you require, which is why a fragmentation of Europe is not to be encouraged or allowed. I think it's vital for all of us that we benefit from that. But there is a globalization of these companies that are taking part. I mean, you only need to look at Qualcomm acquiring the silicon expertise of CSR. You have ARM out of Cambridge still holding a lot of silicon expertise. So, there is expertise in some fundamental areas still remaining within Europe, but in some cases, it's now either Chinese-owned or it can be American-owned. I don't see that as the end of the game. I don't see that as the end of our play within IoT, but it could be a threat if we allow it to be.
If I can add to that, because I think it's very important questions, I think we have a lot of skills still in the innovation side of things. The startups, the entrepreneurs of Europe are fantastic. I think the challenge for us is to make sure to kind of help them to get in contact and with working with the large companies and provide some help for them. Because innovation-wise, I think we are actually in IoT the leading region in the world. I think we are more innovative here than in US or China.
Yeah,
May I ask you something else?
Can I comment on that, please, Magnus? I agree on up to a point, but I think that holds its risks, put it this way. I bear the scars of having been the editor or deputy editor of a magazine that no longer exists. Many, many years ago, my second job after leaving university was working for a magazine called Science and Business. And it was about trying to bring out of the universities and academia the expertise and the skill sets and translating them in what was called at the time and still is, I think, technology transfer into industry. And it applied across the board, but it applies just as much today. And at the time, the magazine that I was writing for, and this was pre-internet days, I really am that old, it was all about what was happening in the UK. But the principles are applying just as much now to Europe as a whole. The picture is a bigger one, but the principle is exactly the same. And what I don't want to see is Europe gaining an expertise in developing ideas, only to see the ideas march out of the borders and be developed very profitably and very successfully elsewhere. That would be iniquitous.
To close this, what role do cellular networks play in IoT in general, Jeremy? Because that's still something that we have close to our hearts in Europe, the cellular technologies and all of that. How important is that going to be onwards?
I think cellular is a crucial part of what is happening within IoT. It's fast, it's efficient, it's proven, it's scalable. Where it falls down is in reach at times. I mean, we need to not lose sight of how much of M2M is delivered via fixed line communications, how much of narrowband activity can be delivered via satellite. There is 70% of the globe that is not covered by a cellular network, so let's not get too hung up on cellular. There is a great deal that I think we're about to see happening in the low-power, wide area networks, which are immensely exciting, bring affordability to a lot of services. They turn a lot of business models from failures into successes by reducing the costs, by enabling long-term battery life for sensors and devices that don't need to be changed every 5 minutes. They can be left for 5-10 years. And there's an announcement that is due out tomorrow, which we'll be reporting on. Unfortunately, it's under an NDA at the moment, a non-disclosure agreement, so I can't say any more. But have a look at our website tomorrow and you'll see a news story out of the US that I think is going to be incredibly important on this. I can't say too much, but there's a new network that will be coming.
Interesting. So this brings us back to the initial question then, because I turned off my LTE when I left the airplane today in Germany, or yesterday. And that's, again, that brings the question back to governments and policies. And I mean, there must be a role for politics and things to solve those, to help us to solve those issues.
Good to hear.
I think that's very important.
But I wouldn't agree. You said we are very innovative in Europe. I would agree. But if you look, let's say, at a couple of questions, I'll give you just a couple of examples. If you look at the 20 biggest companies today in the US with the highest market capitalization and compare this to, let's say, 20 years ago, you will see none of those who were 20 years ago on the top. If you look at Germany, I'll give you examples. The highest the world leading companies with world leading brands were founded in Germany somewhere between 1819 and 1935, and there one big brand after 1935 came on top. That was SAP at the beginning of the 70s. What I'm trying to say with this, or another example, we have a good app, we have quite a good app startup scenery. So we have no problem in Germany. If you look, we have enough seed capital. But if these want to grow, because they have built up technology and then we have to finance their growing process, we don't have finance facilities, let's say, to make them grow. And that means what is going to happen, and I give you a couple of examples of good internet-based companies that were founded in Berlin. They were bought by whom? By American companies. So what I'm trying to say is we need also, let's say, financial facilities to make these companies grow, because I'm very sure you can't do the digitalization without having a vital startup scenery, because the innovation coming from there. And we have to look for that. That's one very, very, very important point. The second is qualifications and the scientific area. We need, in Europe, we need a high-tech industrial policy strategy for the digital world. Because I wouldn't agree, of course we're living in a global economy, but we have to look that certain technologies that are vital for, let's say, for our industrial development, that we are, one, A, to understand them, B, also to produce them. And that means we have to build up really, let's say, high-tech clusters between European companies on certain fields. And if you look at the ICT sector, there are maybe 10 companies in Europe, maybe 15, not more. We have to bring them together and we have to build up clusters where we work on certain issues. That's also a third point that's, to my mind, very, very important. And we have to help. I'll give you another idea. We have to help also by our taxation system. If R&D is so important, and it is important, especially for the development and digitalization, why don't we have tax credits? Why don't we have tax incentive for this? So there are a lot of things to do to incentivize the economic development in this sector, and therefore we need a political framework to make that possible.
Let me jump to something completely different now, because we're covering such a huge space, and we're going to talk about good long-term investments, didn't we? So I've been in M2M for so many years, so I started to say that M2M stands for men to men. But if this is going to be pervasive, it's going to be a lot of women in this as well. How can we invest in bringing women into this? I mean, there's some women, thanks God, here today, but primarily it's men doing this. What's the problem? What's wrong? Why do we have this? How can we change that?
I don't have a magic bullet answer to this, but I do think that we don't make enough effort. We settle for having just men, and that's a fundamental mistake. There are ways, I'm sure, that people more in tune with academia than I am could work with assistance of industry to encourage training in the necessary skills for women and bringing women in. We have started to focus in M2M now on an annual report on how many women there are in senior positions within IoT. But I have to say, in the first year's exercise, it wasn't very easy to find 10 women in very senior positions within IoT. They are there, but there are a lot of people keeping a low profile, and there aren't enough of them, and we need to do a great deal more as an industry to promote it as a career.
Yeah, I think if you look, there's an astonishing picture. If you look at the academia of women, they are better on average than men are. That's true also, let's say, if you look at their school performance. But there's still something I would call a gender or cultural barrier to technology questions. This sounds ridiculous. Still in the beginning of the 21st century, it is, let's say, more on the male side, not on the female side. So we have to open this. We have to bring this into our schools. So what we call this MINT education. So mathematics, informatics, and nature science, and so on. And we have to bring this deeper into the schools, and we have also to involve more women so that they see a career perspective also in this technology world that used to be, if you look historically at this used to be a world of male and not of female. So we need also, I totally agree, a cultural change. A second thing I'd like to say, also on cultural change. Everyone is always talking about Silicon Valley and the startup scene. The truth about Silicon Valley is the following. 90% or even more of the startups are not successful. In Europe, or especially in Germany, if you once have failed in building up a company, you're out of the game. In the US, if you don't have, let's say, at least once have failed in building up a company, you never were an entrepreneur. So we need also, yeah, that's true. So we need a culture of the second and third opportunity. Mm-hmm. So, and that is not, let's say, that's not part of our culture. That's not. So we need a cultural change there because we need these entrepreneurs, and failing once does not mean you never can make it.
It doesn't make you a failure.
That is also a very, very important cultural change in our heads, and especially in the banking sector. Because if you have failed once and you go to a bank trying to finance something, you never get money. Yeah, you don't get the second opportunity. That's also a very, very important point if you want to be successful.
No, we are here to talk about long-term investments in IoT, sustainable. So I'm sure the audience would like to get some good advice now. So if they had all those money they're sitting on, where should they invest them long-term in IoT? In which area, in which type of business? Are we talking infrastructure, are we talking sensors, are we talking big data? What are the big business opportunities? Now we talk hardcore dollars and business.
Well, shall I go?
Yeah, please.
I wouldn't start by investing in what tends to get the headlines, which is the connectivity. With no disrespect to all of those in connectivity here who will earn a very decent return on their very sensible investment. There's no disrespect intended, but for the stellar performance, I think I would be looking for greater expertise to be made available to this industry in data. We need to be able to understand the data that we have better, to marshal it, to manipulate it more quickly, and to make better use of it. Because the raw data at the moment that is being turned out by the Internet of Things is already almost overwhelming the users of it. And I think we have an opportunity there within Europe to be able to be at the forefront of developing the skills. You mentioned SAP, but there are many other examples that one could think of. Companies who are already proven at, in their ability to marshal data and to get the best out of it. But I think a great deal more is needed at a much lower grassroots level so that the services can be picked up by SMEs. At the moment, they tend to be big-scale services for the corporates.
Interesting. So, Mr. Sikora,
Yeah,
where would you put your dollars?
If I understand correctly, I always look at the communication world in those layers, starting from the physical layer going up to the application layer. And what I find very interesting is that on all layers you have very innovative and very promising solutions. You have just been mentioning the narrowband wide area networks, a very interesting field, which is really physical layer infrastructure oriented. But you also have the security activities, which are, I think, one of the major drivers for making applications work safely and securely. And last but not least, you also have the application layer with changing data to information. And this also is a key area. So I would not really restrict this to certain fields, but would say that there's much space for very innovative and attractive solutions.
Yeah, that's a $1 million question.
50 billion.
Yeah, or 50 billion. Okay, if I would have to decide, I would choose two. Okay, one is data security and data protection, because the acceptance and rolling out of certain business models and so on is dependent on this. And to my mind, this will be the most important question in the next years.
Excuse me if I interrupt. I don't agree in this. We had a development already 8 years ago for an embedded TLS stack, which is one of the cornerstones of end-to-end security, very optimized for embedded solutions. I liked it a lot. We just had made 2 projects with that because it was only used when it was mandatory by law. Everybody else gave the same answer like you, oh, it's important. But as soon as it came to money, it was stopped. Yeah, if you invest in this, you have to take into account a 10 years return on investment at least.
I would agree, but I think the question of data security is today totally different scene as 10 years ago.
Yeah, it has changed.
That's all. Yeah. And that is, whenever I talk to business people, and they are going to invest. The second thing is, to my mind, everyone is talking about big data. And the new data being the new oil of the 21st century. So sometimes I ask myself, okay, now we have a bunch of data. What are we going to do with this? So I think I would invest in analytical skills. So having data is fine, but understanding data and analyze data and building out of this new business models, this is to my mind also a very, very important question. Because otherwise you have the bunch of data, but you don't know what to do with this. So these were 2 elements I would go for.
Good. Well, I can add my personal view as an old investor. When you look at the internet, I would always say that there are some incredible companies being built out of internet, and but those are so hard to find. If you put your bets, it's really, really difficult. But I think most of the winners of internet are actually companies that already existed, who figured out how to utilize the new technology and new opportunities in the best ways. So I think I would actually try to find a company doing something important and try to help them make much better business. So my friends, I think we are done. I thank you so much for a very interesting panel discussion. Thank you so much.